You ain't gonna shoot that thing. You ain't got but 2 shells. Maybe 1. And now here's the shot.
Maybe. But you won't.
Anyway, so The Road by Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite books of all time. I've read it probably 6 or 7 times now. And every time I go, gosh darn it, that is a good book. And I'm making this video for 2 reasons. First is it's the conclusion of my 3-part video series about the moral ideas explored in the writings of Cormac McCarthy, but also because I have thoughts about this book that I haven't seen anybody else on the YouTube or podcast talk about, which makes me feel crazy because I feel like the things that Cormac McCarthy is trying to talk about in this book are so clear and hard to miss that I wonder if I'm reading the same book as everybody else. Also makes me think that every YouTube and podcast guy are just watching the same YouTube and podcast and not reading the book that they're talking about, which pisses me off. But fortunately for you guys, I, Jonathan, knower of book facts, will enlighten you today. Okay, super fast summary of The Road. Man and son live in an apocalyptic world, are going south for the winter. But, plot twist, everybody is eating each other. Which you could say pretty not based. And basically, as the book goes on, the man is pushed further and further into moral ambiguity as he tries to protect his son and his son's innocence. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ideas that we've talked about earlier in this series so that we can get to the book. In the first part of this series, Blood Meridian, Cormac McCarthy introduced us to historical law, or the law of superior violence. The idea that the ability to enforce your beliefs is the ultimate ruling force of the universe. That's called the rule of superior violence. And in that, all ideas about morality are subsumed. They are inferior to it. They must be submitted to it. The second part of this series, No Country for Old Men, gave us an idea of what living historical law looks like. That's Anton Chigurh. And he says something really interesting when a character asks them to not kill him. He says, "You're asking that I make myself vulnerable, and that I can never do." He's saying if I adhere to any other law than historical law, I make myself vulnerable to those who don't do that. In The Road, Cormac McCarthy puts that idea on trial. Is that actually true? Can a person adhere to a moral code without making themselves vulnerable, without being killed for it? That's actually the central idea of this video essay series, and I'm excited to finally get to it. The Road is the most digestible book Cormac McCarthy ever wrote. I mean, like, linguistically, its language is very sparse and often extremely simple. But also ideologically, the moral arguments of the book are put forth in a way that's very easy to understand, even though, interestingly, there are no monologues in this book. In fact, the dialogue that we do have is often extremely short-worded, and the meaning of it is highly subtextual. To illustrate his arguments, Cormac McCarthy kind of goes by the first rule that they teach you in writing school, which is show, do not tell. The most memorable line in this book is one passed frequently between the father and the son: "We're carrying the fire." And as they go through this society and interact with other characters that are also trying to survive, it becomes very apparent what that means. Scarcity of food is the primary driving conflict of the book. It's also what illuminates or illustrates the biggest difference between our main characters and pretty much everybody else in the book. The number one food source for most people is other people, because crops don't grow and all the livestock is gone. Carrying the fire is a broad way of saying, no matter how bad it gets, we'll never be like them. We will never hunt down people and eat them. We will not run people farms. We will not murder strangers for their meat. We are carrying the legacy of human decency and goodness with us. That's what carrying the fire means. The moral philosophy or the moral argument of all the other characters in this book is, I have to behave this way or I will die. I will make myself vulnerable. Where have we heard that sentiment espoused before? If I adhere to any moral code, I leave myself vulnerable to those who don't. Where have we heard that sentiment espoused before. And that's why I say these books are all the same story. The antagonists all hold the same worldview. The difference in these books is how our protagonists engage with our antagonists. The kid from Blood Meridian just accepted it. He said, historical law, the law of superior violence, rules the universe. Therefore, I need to engage with it. I need to be the keeper of historical law. I need to be the most violent in order to enforce my moral code. In No Country for Old Men, Sheriff Bell just rejects it, just walks away from it, because he realizes he can't compete with someone who lives historical law without giving up his own moral compass. I'll read you something that he said. I won't push my chips forward and stand up and go out and meet him. It ain't just about being older. I wish that it was. I can't say that it's even what you were willing to do. I think it's more like what you're willing to become. And I think a man would have to put his soul at hazard, and I won't do that. And I think now that maybe I never would. So how do the man and the boy react to seeing universal acceptance of the law of superior violence? Well, the man makes a really interesting argument with his actions in the book. He acknowledges that historical law rules the actions of pretty much everybody else they talk to. He accepts that, but he refuses to submit to it. The man lives by his moral code, even with a perfect and total knowledge that will probably eventually kill him. Or at the very least that by doing that he endangers himself and his son more than he needs to. This is not a worldview that any of Cormac McCarthy's protagonists have held so far. Every other protagonist has held life and death as the ultimate decider, and in the face of it, all moral codes fail. If your moral code doesn't keep you alive, it's kind of worthless. The man in The Road presents the argument that it is better to die with integrity than to live without it. And that's where the thesis of this video and this video essay series comes from. The man chooses not to kill a thief who tried to steal all their stuff. The man and the boy do not eat people, even when they're starving and absolutely have the opportunity to do so. In fact, they shared food with an old man at one point in the book, even though they themselves have extremely limited food. All these things are objectively the right thing to do. Nobody would tell you that these things aren't the right thing to do, but they come with a steep personal cost, meaning by doing these things, they make themselves more vulnerable. Even though morality will kill you, that does not alleviate you from the obligation to behave morally. That's the claim that the man makes, and that's actually the thesis of this video essay series. Too often, what we call moral tales are actually thinly veiled parables of a secular prosperity gospel. They teach do good and good things will happen to you. Groundhog Day and Ratatouille and A Man Called Ove and The Hunger Games and The Avengers all focus on characters learning to do what's right and being rewarded externally for it. The Road subverts this, and that's what, in my opinion, makes it a tale of true morality. The man does what's right because it's right, even when he stands to gain by not doing so, and even when he stands to lose by doing what's right, which, for the record, those are the times that it actually counts to do what's right. The man believes that the reward for doing what's right is having done what's right, and becoming the kind of person that doing what's right in the face of personal cost makes you into. I think of Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. One of the most evocative passages I've ever read in my life is him explaining to Scout that he needs to defend Tom Robinson, a black man, even though it'll hurt his career and even though they'll be ostracized and even though it ultimately endangers his family, because he tells her, I couldn't go to church and legitimately worship God if I don't do right by this man. That is the argument of The Road. And I understand that taking 3 videos in like 40 minutes to explain that doing good is a little bit much, but I think we see the arguments of the antagonists in these books cleverly disguised around us all the time. When we see people defend the wealthy, suppressing workers' wages and raising the cost of living on the poor and disenfranchised by saying, well, it's their property and it's their right to do whatever they want with it. When people tell indigenous people who are bitter about occupation, well, you should have won the war then. When the people argue that the rich have no obligation to the poor. When billionaires obsess over and invest millions into bunkers and spaceships to escape a coming apocalypse, rather than investing that money in preventing a coming apocalypse. When politicians and pundits use alternative truth, or even just the concept of objective truth, not as standards to be submitted to, but as an arm of power to enforce their narrative. All those arguments and behaviors come from the fundamental belief that if a person has the ability to do something, they have the moral authorization to do it. That's a watered down but ultimately not less harmful version of the law of superior violence. And even though it puts us at a disadvantage relative to others, each of us has an obligation to reject that worldview. Here's the last thing I'll say. The man wins the moral argument of The Road. At the end of the book, he dies a peaceful death looking out over the ocean. His son is taken in by another good family and always remembers him. The man rejected the idea of abandoning all morality to survive, and he didn't get eaten, and he didn't get enslaved, and it didn't kill him. That's the argument of The Road, and I think that Cormac McCarthy is right. We can reject the idea of abandoning morality, and it will not kill us.